Did you know that the Singapore River holds the key to understanding the city's past, present, and future? From a small fishing village to a global mega city, the river's transformation is a story waiting to be told. So, Renjie, on the last episode, we spoke of the Esplanade, and there is a great viewing point out there from where you can see the mouth of the Singapore River.
Yes.
Today, I want us to talk about the Singapore River,
Yes.
which you said is probably the lifeline of the city that is Singapore. So, where do we start? What's a good point to start?
So I will say that, people probably already are very familiar with the Singapore River. They've seen the Singapore River because at the Merlion, which of course everybody goes to when you go to Singapore, if you're standing at the Merlion and looking at the water, you look left, that's already the Singapore River. Because essentially the Singapore River is a river that goes from inland and it goes a long windy path, but it essentially empties out into the Marina Bay, right?
Yeah.
And so the Marina Bay is essentially the freshwater reservoir where the Singapore River ends at.
Hold on, freshwater or saltwater?
So the Marina Bay is freshwater. And that's something that people don't realize. But it's essentially freshwater because even though it's a bay, the mouth of the bay has been cut off. And it's intentionally done so. It's a place called Marina Barrage. Marina Barrage is essentially a thing that was developed, the mechanism that was developed to control the inflow and outflow of water from what is essentially now a freshwater reservoir. So it's all cut off from the sea unless they want to open up the barrage to let in the seawater or let out the freshwater.
Okay.
But all the way up until that point, which is right close to where the Marina Bay Sands is, on the other side of Marina Bay Sands, that's essentially all freshwater.
I had never thought of that because when you're standing at Merlion Park, as it's called, right? You have the Merlion, then you have Marina Bay Sands.
Yes.
And past the Marina Bay Sands is the South China Sea, if I'm
correct. Right where Marina Bay Sands is where the Marina Barrage is. And it's a beautiful place to go visit. A lot of people go there for kite flying.
Oh, okay. So that's where the Singapore River at least begins for us. It's the mouth of the river.
It's the mouth of the river.
Or where it ends for some, the way you look at it,
it depends on which way you start. But one thing that's really cool about the Singapore River is that it's the lifeblood of Singapore because it flows through really important districts in Singapore. And our old civic district, which is the old colonial precinct in Singapore, was all built along the river. Right?
Okay.
So, one great way to explore the different parts without having to walk in the hot Singapore sun is by taking the Singapore River cruise. You've probably seen these bumboats
around. Yeah.
So they're little bumboats. They take probably like 12 people max. And you get on them at various points along the Singapore River. One point is Clarke Quay, which I think many people know about. And it essentially takes you down the Singapore River around the Marina Bay, and it comes back. And I always think that the best thing to do is to sit on that at sunset, just as everything is turning golden. And it's a literally cool, breezy way to see, a part of Singapore that everybody sees, but from a completely different angle because you're right on the water and you're seeing the bay, from going down the Singapore River, then circling around the bay and then coming back up again.
And then don't the boats have a running commentary or audio thing?
They do, yeah.
Right?
So they tell you a little bit, depending on the kind of student that you are, whether you want to pay attention to what you're seeing, there is a running commentary in all these different languages that tells you essentially all the different important monuments and landmarks. And it's a very beautiful part of town because it's the old colonial precinct of Singapore. So you have the Victoria Theatre, the Victoria Concert Hall, you have the Asian Civilizations Museum, you have our old Parliament House, which is now an arts house. And all of this is, of course, beautiful to see from the water, but also just beautiful to walk around. It's usually quiet and just lovely to walk on the weekends.
I guess the weather in Singapore sometimes can get really hot or humid.
It depends.
I think that's probably a good way to just check out Singapore. I often, if there's a river in the city, I often like to take a riverboat cruise. So it gives you a good idea about the city and then you can start exploring it on foot, right?
Yeah.
There's also a little bit of history attached to it. It was where Sir Raffles actually set foot or something like that?
Yes. So the landing point, the founding father of colonial Singapore, Sir Stamford Raffles, landed right essentially on the mouth of the river. And today it's commemorated by a statue of, Sir Stamford Raffles that you can see. But what's really interesting, and so it really is the old sort of starting point of modern Singapore, right? But what's really interesting is where you are standing at this, statue where he landed, and you look across, that's an area called Boat Quay.
Okay.
Right. So the river has a whole bunch of quays. Quays are essentially just where whatever boats come up to dock. But across the river is a place called Boat Quay, and that's essentially where our central business district is centered. So you see these huge towering skyscrapers across the river, and it's placed there for a reason. Do you know the reason?
No.
Okay, so legend has it. This might be urban legend. So disclaimer is that
But we all love urban
may or may not be
legends,
fake news, but it's urban legend anyways. There's value in that, right? So if you look at the way the Singapore River goes, there's this one point where it bends in a particularly dramatic fashion.
Okay.
Right? And so the legend has it that when the founding fathers of Singapore were trying to decide where to put our central business district, they consulted a Feng Shui master. So Feng Shui is essentially the Chinese equivalent of Vastu. Right? And in Chinese sort of culture, the carp, which is a type of fish, is regarded as very auspicious. And the most auspicious part of the carp is the belly of the carp, because that's where all the goodies, the goodness is, right? And so they decided that in order to have the best chance of success, that's where we would put our central business district, which is of course where you have all our banks, our financial institutions, our most important MNCs are all based there. And so I guess it worked. It brought in the wealth to Singapore, and the reason why is because it's right at that position where it's situated right at the belly of the carp.
So this is why I like that running commentary when you're in the boat also.
It'll tell you that.
It tells you that, and otherwise you're just staring at different things and you're like, okay, I clicked a photo of it, and that's
it's pretty, but like what else?
So hold on a minute. Like there's Merlion Park and there's Marina Bay.
Yes.
There's this central business district. So what really is the center of Singapore?
So this was the colonial center of Singapore, but actually it's not the original center of Singapore, which is a little bit east of this.
Okay.
Before the British came, the center of Singapore, which I think should be the topic of probably another episode.
Let's take that as the next episode. What is that?
Yeah, it's called Kampong Glam, and it's the old Malay royal quarters of Singapore.
Okay.
Which today is just an incredibly vibrant, buzzy place. It's like worth visiting just of its own accord. So we should talk about this at the next.
So it's Kampong Glam.
Kampong Glam, yes.
Kampong Glam. Okay, let's take that as the next episode. But I'm glad we brought out the Singapore River, and what I still feel is an underrated thing.
Very much
Probably
so.
Our listeners and viewers will hop onto that boat and check out all of Singapore.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Kampong Glam next.